Yes, you should change the differential gears in your Jeep Wrangler JK. The reason, it's the absolute best way to compensate for after you've moved up to a larger tire size. It greatly reduces the strain on your powertrain, and it not only helps you regain performance, but get back fuel economy that was lost as well. Aside from cost, there's really no downside of putting a numerically higher differential gear in your Jeep Wrangler JK. Now, there are a few different gear ratios that did come from the 2007 to 2018 JK platform. My specific 2012 Rubicon came with a set of 410 differential gears. That's a really good gear out of the gate, and it actually works pretty decently up to a 35-inch tall tire. Moving to a 37, you need a little bit more. Now, if you're not familiar with what 410 even means, essentially a 4.10 ratio equates to the pinion, which is connected to your drive shaft, rotating 4.10 times for every time the ring gear turns once. That's a 4:10 ratio. Now, one of the big things about going with a numerically higher gear ratio is that you're doing so to increase the gear reduction. It's one of the reasons why Rubicon comes with a 4:1 transfer case versus a standard 2.72. That gear multiplication makes the vehicle work better off-road. It gives you a little bit more control. It's going to compensate for the larger tire much better than that factory ratio, especially if you're going to be doing more technical off-roading, rock crawling and things like that. That's why the lower gears that are numerically higher but we call lower are so important. The challenge is, especially with the 07 to 2011 JK, it came with a 3.8 liter, and that's pretty gutless. It just doesn't have a lot of power. So when you move up even to a 35, you really notice that power zap. And unfortunately, the automatic that came behind that 3.8 liter that's in the 07 to 11 isn't very good as well. And so you're really putting a lot of strain on that powertrain by moving up tire sizes and not changing differential gears. When the 3.6 liter came out in 2012, it had a lot more horsepower, and when you got it with the automatic, it had the nag 1, and that automatic 5-speed is very robust. In fact, it can handle V8 power, which is pretty impressive. The real challenge is, what are you going to be doing with the Jeep, and how is your Jeep going to be outfitted? If you live in high elevation and you're doing a lot of rock crawling, you're going to find that you need differential gears much faster than someone that lives like I do in the coastal plains of North Carolina, where we don't see a lot of elevation and might not be doing something as extreme. So you really have to build and get the right gear set for your vehicle. If you are a manual transmission JK owner, my experience has been owning multiple JKs with manual transmissions. I would always recommend going with a little bit higher ratio. So if, for example, I put 488 differential gears in this JK with the automatic, I would recommend going with a 513 if I had a manual. It'll give you a bit more control and power, and it's well worth it. So go a little bit higher numerically with the manual transmission over the automatic. Now, as I mentioned, I went 488 in this JK, and if you followed this channel for quite some time, you might remember quite a few years ago, I had a pretty similar black 2013 JK with the 3.6 liter and automatic transmission. And when it came time to swap the differential gears in that Jeep, I went 513. And at the time, I thought I wanted to have as much gearing as possible because I knew I would be taking that Jeep across America. And I wanted to make sure when I was on the highway that it wouldn't be searching for, dropping out of overdrive and that sort of thing. And I wanted to have just as much power as I absolutely could. I paired it with a 37 by 1250 Nitto Ridge Grappler. It was a great, excellent build platform. Jeep did fantastic on road and off, but my main complaint with it was at interstate speeds, it revved really high. You're always around that 3,000 plus RPM range, and it just absolutely sucked down fuel on the highway. That Jeep actually got much better fuel economy driving around town than it did on the interstate. And when I knew that this Jeep was ultimately going to need gears for the 37's, I decided I wasn't going to go back with 513 because I remembered that. So I went with a 4.88. Now there's a lot of discussion that you'll see online about, well, if you go with a higher numerical gear, the pinion's just going to be super tiny and it's going to be very weak and you have to worry about that braking. Well, a lot of that comes from sort of the previous generation to the JK, the Jeep Wrangler TJ. It had a Dana 30 and Dana 35, very common. You could get them with the Dana 44 rear, and then when the Rubicon came out, it had a low pinion 44 front and a low pinion 44 rear. A big upgrade for that platform, but one of the things that people quickly realized is with those smaller differentials, as you went up numerically, that pinion head did get really small. Now, the JK, it's a next generation style Dana 44. It uses a high pinion 44 front, a low pinion 44 rear, and with the Rubicon specifically, it's a pretty robust gear set for what it is. And my experience, which I will show you on the screen, the difference between a 410 pinion and a 488 isn't that dramatic. My experience of covering JKs for years and going on different ventures all the way from Alaska and Texas and rock crawling all over the US with these is if you're going to break a ring and pinion, it's probably going to be from shock load, from overloading the Jeep, driving it a little bit too hard, that sort of thing. Usually it's not because the pinion just happened to be that much smaller and it broke. Now I will tackle a lot of things in the drivetrain, but setting up gears is not one of them. It is a bit of an art, and if you're comfortable doing it and you do it a lot, it really looks easy, but in my experience, this is one of those jobs that's best left to the professionals. I went with Revolution Gear and Axle. They make a very quality product. I knew that the off-road shop, Low Range 4x4 here in Wilmington, NC, that was going to be installing it, installs a lot of Revolution Gear and Axle ring and pinion, so they were absolutely on board with, yeah, this is an excellent company to go with, which was definitely an important thing for me because obviously I don't want to try to twist anybody's arm to put in something that they know is going to be a problem because ultimately it's going to come back to the shop. So I went with Revolution Gear and Axle. If you're not familiar with that company, they've been around, I think, since like 2012. They are a drivetrain shop, so basically they make axle shafts, drive shafts, obviously ring and pinions. You can get your full master install kit from them, which is what I did. They're veteran owned and operated. There are a lot of gear companies out there that I won't call out that are all owned by private equity, and in my experience their quality hasn't been as good since private equity has taken over. That's happened to a lot of things in this industry. So my little 2 cents, I like Revolution Gear and Axle. You know, always speak to your shop and whoever's installing the gears because they're going to have an opinion on who makes a quality gear set, and they're ultimately going to be the ones that need to stand behind it. But Revolution Gear and Axle has been good for me, and as I'm recording this in front of the Jeep, the gears have been in here for a hot minute and no issues. It's also worth mentioning that I changed out a few other components at the same time it was in the shop. I will go more into what those are and why in my next video on the JK, but I do want to touch on the drive shafts as I did get those replaced at the same time, and want to mention why that's important if you were thinking about doing differential gearing. So this is the factory drive shaft up here. This is the same one that's been in the Jeep for 144,000 miles on it. This is the front drive line, and this is where it mounts at the transfer case. And here you have what's called a Rosetta style joint, and it gives you a lot of degree deflection, and what they're really good at is masking vibration. So as you lift the Jeep and this angle becomes a little bit more, I don't want to call it extreme, but it becomes more of an angle than stock, it doesn't have a lot of feedback inside of the vehicle. It's very good at adapting to angles. Now, one of the challenges is as you get more travel and a longer travel suspension, you can actually max this out pretty easy, and when that happens you can actually rip the boot, or more often than not the failure is because you have such an extreme angle on the cage that's inside of here. That's what causes it to fail, and then you're on the trail with a broken drive shaft. So an upgrade from that is something like this. Now this drive shaft comes from Revolution Gear and Axle, and it's a direct bolt-in, and what is really the sort of star of this front drive shaft is this 1350 series double cardan joint, and this is going to allow it to have all of the flex and degree deflection that it needs. So if you do have a longer travel suspension, you're going to be able to flex the Jeep and not have an issue. And this style of joint does a very good job at essentially taking care of vibration as well. It's not as good as that Rzepa, but it is significantly stronger. So it's sort of a balance in when you're trading off vibration for strength. For me, I knew these drive shafts were original. They're pretty old. I wanted to go ahead and upgrade with something much stronger, so that's why I went with this. A couple other things that's worth noting. You'll see that the outside diameter of this tube is larger than the aftermarket one, and one of the advantages of having a narrower diameter is you're going to get better clearance for your cross member. It's going to be better ground clearance ultimately going off-road, and this wall is actually going to be a thicker wall than what comes from the factory, so you actually have something that's significantly stronger than the original drive shaft. Now you'll also see this is where it slips, so as your drive shaft cycles it goes in and out. You're actually going to have that down here at the axle end. And it's worth talking about the axle end as well. While it does use a traditional style U-joint at the front, the aftermarket one I went with is much stronger. This is a 1350 style joint, and since I'm doing the differential gears already, I can go ahead and swap out that yoke, and it's best to do that. You know, if you're going to do a drive shaft, it's honestly best to go ahead and do it when you are doing differential gears, because the yoke on your pinion, you have a crush style sleeve, and you want to set that with the yoke that's going to be on the vehicle so you don't have to do that later. So that's why this ultimately made the most sense. You may also notice that I am no longer running the mud grapplers. I've since made the switch to a 37 by 1250 R17 Nitto trail grappler. I'll talk more about why I did this in the next video, but the basic highlights are these mud terrain radials are 10 pounds lighter per tire, and I went from this road noise to this. I do also want to mention that if you have a 2007 to 2011 JK on 37s, I would still recommend going with a 513 over the 488. In my current configuration, I'm seeing around 16 miles per gallon, which is up from the 14.5 before, thanks to the lower RPM range. In fact, I'm around 2100 RPM at 55, and I'm around 2700 RPM at 70, and that calms it down just a little bit from that 513 that I had years ago, and I definitely prefer it. Now, another thing that you will need to have if your Jeep does not already have is some sort of calibrator or module, so you can tell the Jeep that it now has a different gear ratio. And obviously if you've got a taller tire or you're moving to that at the same time, you're going to need to let the Jeep know that as well, or the Jeep would potentially go into what's called limp home mode. This Jeep already had an AEV Pro Cal. I don't even think they sell those anymore. I know that Rough Country, Super Chips, I think JKS and Z Automotive all make calibration units for the JK that you can adjust for tire size and gear ratio. And I would just check out their features and figure out which one has the features you want and fits your budget the best. Doesn't really matter. They're all kind of doing the same thing in terms of telling the Jeep, hey, it's got 488 gears now, so your speedometer will be correct. Another thing that's worth knowing that I'm sure the shop, whoever's installing your differential gears, will go over this, but I'll reiterate the importance of breaking in the new gear ratio. So for the first 500 miles with your gears, you really don't want to drive the Jeep for more than 30 minutes. You kind of want to heat cycle the gear and then let it cool down. And most gear manufacturers will also tell you don't go over 65 miles per hour. So you need a plan if you are going out of town to get your Jeep re-geared. You don't want to, drive 2 hours there, drop off your Jeep, and then go, oh, I'm gonna just go drive it 2 hours back home and haul a tail. You need a plan. Okay, I'm gonna have to drive for 30 minutes, sit for probably 30 minutes, drive for 30 minutes, sit for 30 minutes. Because you don't want to smoke that gear set. Once you get to that 500 mile mark, you will actually change the differential fluid. After that, you're good to go. You can go do rock crawl and all that good stuff. So, a few little things that are important to note there. Ultimately, I really like 488 gears with the 3.6 liter and automatic and a 37. I think that's the way to go. If you have a lot, I'm talking about rooftop tent, heavy bumpers and you're, you know, doing a lot of cross country, hey, I'm going to be going to Moab, I want to go rock crawl, maybe a 513 makes more sense for you. I think for the lightness of how this Jeep is built, for what I'm doing with it, I'm really happy with that calmer RPM ratio overall. So I think 488 was definitely the better fit. If you've got any questions or want to, you know some more gear ratios for maybe a smaller tire, I'm happy to answer those in the comments. So just drop them down below. If you want to see some stuff that I'm working on behind the scenes, you can always check me out at all social media at Ollie Mansour Editor. As always, I appreciate you guys watching these videos, and I hope to see you on the trail. Take care.